Hey hotties, welcome back to the pod. I have been a little under the weather, so if I sound more nasal voice fry than usual, I'm sorry. Well, actually, I'm not sorry, but that's why. Now, today we're talking about one of the buzzwords of our generation, if we're being honest, and that is situationships. I still remember I had an intake with an older therapist, and I was talking about my dating life, and she was like, oh, so basically it's a situationship. And I was like, the fact that you know that word really signifies that this may be a bit of an epidemic. Now, the funny thing is, when I was thinking about starting the podcast, I thought I was going to be talking about dating all the time because, listen, girl has a lot to say on this subject. But the thing is, I really don't like to be prescriptive or give advice or talk about things in a very theoretical way. Like, I like to lead with my personal experiences and takeaways. But naturally, with dating, I don't want to disclose everything about my dating history, and it obviously involves other people. So I'm still trying to find that balance, but I do want to, just on a high level, talk about my experience with situationships because it really does inform a lot of my takes, and I just want people to know why I feel the way about them that I do. Now, my first proper situationship, basically I met someone who had just gone out of a relationship, and I don't think it was a particularly healthy one, so he knew he wasn't ready to jump into something serious. I knew pretty quickly off the bat that this is someone I would consider dating seriously, so it's like, why did I agree to something more casual? But the thing is, I had a very instant attraction and chemistry with him that was and still is very rare for me. I don't think it was that rare for him. And so I was going into it with a bit of a scarcity mindset, and I think I felt like I just wanted to see it through no matter what capacity it was in. I would say the first 3 weeks were very honeymoon phase, just like romantic. Things escalated kind of quickly. And then things started to get a little weird like a month in. But I was still on my bad bitch mentality, so I remember I sat him down and I was like, if you're upset with me, you can't just be distant or passive aggressive. Like, you need to communicate. You still owe me that, even if this isn't a serious relationship, because otherwise I'm going to spiral about what's wrong, and then this just isn't worth my time. So I'm like, you need to be better or I'm not going to stay. The problem is he was not better, and then I still stayed, so I did not stand on business. And from there, things just kind of devolved. We both were going through a lot in our personal lives and were just not in a good mental place. I was very depressed. His inconsistent behavior was definitely making me more depressed. And even now when I look back on it, I'm like, why did I stay in that situation as long as I did? I think there's a few reasons. The first one, this was my last few months in banking. I was getting aggressively overworked. I'd already agreed to take on an also very demanding private equity job afterwards. And I hated work. I felt so hopeless about life. And I guess I kind of viewed him as like my one source of joy, like my one dopamine hit, even though I don't think he was really making me happy anymore at this point. But it was just this kind of unhealthy fixation that I had, or like dependency, I guess you could call it. The second reason, I still had a raging savior complex at this time. And when he was going through stuff, I didn't feel like his friends were as supportive as they should be. So I told myself, you can't abandon him now. I was like, who cares if I have feelings for him? I need to continue to be there for him, even if it comes at the cost of my own mental health, because I'm strong and I can handle it, even though I was not strong and I could not handle it at all. The third and probably biggest reason is that I was holding on to some delusional hope that we would still work out eventually, which is literally a joke. It was so clear that we were not compatible and that this is not someone I wanted to be with. But I don't know, I was in deep and I felt like if I made the decision to just cut things off, it would take any potential future stuff off the table. I guess one last reason is I think we both caught feels, but he would never admit it. So then the narrative would just be that I caught feels and that's why we had to end. I also feel like if I tried to call him out on any of the things he did, he would probably just gaslight me and invalidate my feelings. But thankfully he made the first move to end the dating or whatever not dating aspect of our relationship and then wanted to be friends. And then after a few weeks, I was like, actually, I do not want to be friends with you. And that was that. I took so criminally long to get over that I actually cannot speak about it. Anyway, from there, I moved on to another situationship. This is fucking embarrassing. I honestly should not be putting this on the internet, but this was a little different. I had learned my lesson, right? If it's someone that you would want to be in a serious relationship with, obviously don't pursue something purely casual with them. But with this guy, on paper, he was not someone that I'd want a long-term relationship with. He was just very smart and interesting and different. And he was going to be moving to another country in a few months. So I was like, okay, this is perfect. It'll be like a fun little stint. It was kind of similar in the sense that he was very affectionate. So things moved very quickly in the beginning. But I will say he was mature and communicative for the most part. And from the get-go, he was like, oh, my girlfriends are saying this is not a good idea. And you're going to get hurt. And I need to be transparent that I really don't have the bandwidth to prioritize this because I'm figuring out my life so that I can, move to another country. But I just kept telling him that I was going to be fine. I don't even know if I thought I was going to be fine. I was just dead set on convincing him so that I could keep seeing him. Again, really awesome decision making here. And it was kind of deja vu in the sense that he was super available to me in the beginning and we were hanging out all the time. And then he kind of pulled back / disappeared. And again, I attempted to stand on business. I was like, oh, if this is what you can give me, I don't think it's enough. And I don't think we should keep seeing each other. And I think he said it wasn't fair for me to blindside him with an ultimatum. But I'm like, you told me that you can't prioritize this. So if the energy you're giving me is not enough and is making me unhappy, like, what can we do besides end it? I can't even remember how this conversation ended. Like, this was years ago. I also was kind of having a mental breakdown, so I think we just talked through it. But we did continue seeing each other. Around this time, I descended into the deepest depths of my depression. I hated my private equity job, but I had convinced myself that I had to stay for 2 years. So I just felt so trapped. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I definitely did the same thing where I took all my unhappiness about the rest of my life and projected it onto this one person and just felt like, oh, if I could have this one person or be with this one person, then I would be okay. Again, really healthy behavior. I was in a very concerning and alarming state, and this person continued to stay by my side and support me, even though it wasn't, a serious relationship. And that is something I will always be very grateful for. But yeah, this all ended when, he left the country, obviously. I ended up quitting my private equity job and moving back home. And we're still on good terms. I think having his very different life perspective was one of the big reasons I built up the courage to quit this finance job and just leave this career track that I was convinced I had to follow. So I'm very glad that I met him, and I'm very appreciative of the time that we spent together, and I think it was very important for me. And after that, I never had another full-fledged situationship where I was fully emotionally involved with someone, knowing that it wasn't going anywhere. So, it took 2 tries, but I did eventually learn my lesson. So now that I've aggressively overshared about my dating life after I said that I wouldn't, let's talk about the reasons that I hate situationships. A few disclaimers. First off, when I say situationship, I don't mean talking stage or that period before you become a relationship. I mean going through the motions of dating, knowing that it's not going to be a relationship. I'm also going to talk about it in the context of a cishet relationship because obviously that's what I know. But I have seen a lot of similar dynamics play out in queer relationships. Oh, and the last thing, I saw a TikTok that was my hot take is you should be able to engage in any level of intimacy and not have it be a relationship. And I do agree with that. I don't think it's inherently illegal for you to give forehead kisses to someone you're not actually dating, for example. If there is mutual communication and respect and you genuinely want the same things, a situationship can totally work. I just don't think that's the reality of how it plays out a majority of the time. Now, the first big thing for me is a lack of accountability, because you can start seeing someone and they can say, oh, I can't do something serious right now. I don't have the bandwidth. And I guess that technically frees them from any responsibility. You would hope that they still owe you some basic human empathy and communication. But the other issue is a lot of people use this as an excuse to be so inconsistent with their behavior. If you tell someone, I can't be that available to you, and then you're consistently not that available, okay, fair enough. But I see people, straight men in particular, without even realizing it, treat people so hot and cold. Because a lot of guys will be very affectionate and available to you in the beginning because they're riding the high of having intimacy and companionship again. And then they get busy or they have a knee-jerk reaction to things getting too intimate, and then they pull back. And that will fuck with the person's head. Also, if you pull away and then you're consistently distant, the other person has a choice to just leave the situation, right? But more often than not, the person suddenly comes back and things go back to the way they were in the beginning. And then you get trapped in this cycle where you feel like you shouldn't leave because things might get good again. There's literally science that if you don't know when you're going to get your next quote unquote hit, it will make you addicted the same way you are to a drug. That lack of predictability and lack of consistency psychologically feeds a fixation and an obsession with that person. And I just don't think it's a fair way to treat someone, regardless of whether it's a friendship, situationship, relationship. Just because it's not serious doesn't mean you can subject someone to emotional whiplash based on what's going on in your own life. The other big thing, I think most situationships lack an equal exchange of emotional labor. One could make the argument that this is a case for just like all cishet relationships, but you've seen the joke, right? Where your boyfriend goes to hang out with his best friend and his best friend just broke up with his girlfriend of 8 years, and your boyfriend gets home and you're like, oh, how's he doing after the breakup? And your boyfriend's like, oh, it didn't come up. And you're like, what? Like, so many straight male friendships, they just, I don't know, hang out and play games and don't actually talk about anything. So when men need an active listener or support or just an emotionally intelligent person to speak to, they go to the women in their lives. Oh, I actually saw such a funny TikTok. I'll try to find it so I can link it down below. But it's this guy talking about situationships in the context of Marxist feminism. The comments are so funny. They were like, me on a first date, someone played Mitski over this. But basically he says that in Marxist feminism, the nuclear family is a construct created to just exploit women for their reproductive labor, having kids, raising kids, cooking, cleaning, etc. But what's spoken about less explicitly is the emotional labor. We're assuming the man works in an office or in a factory where he's exploited and hates his job and has this built up resentment. And the expectation is that when he gets home, the woman is supposed to counterbalance this resentment so he doesn't revolt against capitalism. And I do think situationships are just another manifestation of exploiting women for free emotional labor. You might say just don't do the work for free, but at least me personally, like if I'm going to be spending time with someone, I will naturally build some depth to our relationship. I'm going to be an active listener. I'm going to support you. I'm going to probably accidentally therapize you, but that's just how I interact with human beings. But the issue arises when the tables turn and the woman is seeking support and suddenly homeboy's running for the goddamn hills, especially because there's this perception that women always want something more serious. So many men in this instance pull the I told you I can't be your boyfriend card when you don't want them to be your boyfriend. You're just seeking some reciprocity of basic human empathy. And okay, this is going to make me sound like such a boomer and is also kind of hypocritical because I'm literally a content creator. But if you've read Dopamine Nation or just any of the research and discourse around living in the generation of social media, they talk about how we have validation, distraction, companionship to some extent at our fingertips at all times through our phones. And these dopamine stimulators that we used to have to work so hard for are now just accessible to us 24/7. So the same way that we can just order food delivery instead of, I don't know, hunting a mammoth for dinner, I feel like people just want deep human intimacy and companionship, but don't want to put in any of the work for it. Because the reality is, if you really want that level of connection with someone, not even a relationship, just like even a friendship, you have to go through conflict, you have to work through issues. And I guess people just don't really want to do that anymore. Now, something I haven't really seen people talk about in the context of situationships is the idea of detachment, because in order to enjoy any short-term dating situation, you have to make peace with the fact that that person is not going to be there forever. And I first learned about detachment in the context of Buddhism, this idea of trust and surrender rather than control. And I think it's such a noble thing to aspire towards, right? To just enjoy someone's company, someone's presence in your life, regardless of how long they're there. But I don't know that it's human nature. Like, I'm sure part of the reason we have the construct of marriage is because we want to know that someone's just going to be there for our whole damn life. And this is something that I struggle with a lot. Like in situationships, even if things are going well, I have this constant low-level anxiety where I'm like preemptively mourning the loss of this person. I will admit I am probably hyper-independent and self-preservational to a fault. But here, let's use like a stupid example. Let's say someone comes into your life and knows how to make the perfect cup of coffee and makes you your morning coffee. For me, if I know that they could disappear tomorrow, I would rather just make my own coffee or not have coffee, because I don't want to wake up and suddenly have this source of joy and this part of my life that I'm used to having suddenly disappear. And I know it's such a scarcity mindset way to think about things, but if someone makes you happy, if they do things for you, if they make your life generally better, I think it's natural to worry about the repercussions and the loss when you don't have that person anymore. I think one of the most difficult things about situationships that I've had to grapple with in hindsight is the behavior that I put up with. I like to think I have very high standards for the people in my life. Like, there's so much mutual trust, respect, communication, love. And I have a very high bar for the type of person I'm going to pursue a serious relationship with. Well, obviously, that's why I'm never in a fucking serious relationship. But because situationships are inherently like a short-term fun thing, it's easy to excuse certain behaviors that you wouldn't tolerate in a serious partner. But that becomes a very slippery slope, and suddenly you're so emotionally invested in someone who is not treating you the way you deserve to be treated. I also think a lot of people don't realize how difficult it can be to end a situationship. So many of them are born on this premise of chillness, like it's chill, it's not that deep, we're not going to catch feels. So you really have to set aside your pride to say, oh, we weren't going to catch feels, but I did, or oh, you told me not to expect anything from you, and I said I wouldn't, but I did, and I got disappointed, and I got sad, so now I have to go. Especially because this person is not your serious partner, it's entirely possible they don't validate your feelings and just chalk it up to you being down bad or you not being able to handle something casual. And yeah, that's not a very fun conversation to have. Okay, one other thing, and I guess this is more an issue if you've only had situationships and not relationships. In situationships, it can get very intimate, but there are specific things that are off limits because it's relationship territory. So for me, I've watched someone lose feelings for me, or I've been blindsided by a breakup, or I've had a big fight where someone says fucked up shit to me, but I've never gotten flowers from a guy, or celebrated Valentine's Day, or I don't know, like been a guy's lock screen. And I obviously recognize that I have not had to experience the heartbreak or loss that comes with a serious relationship. I honestly don't think I would survive it, but it is kind of embarrassing to have repeatedly put yourself on the line and given people access to yourself and had nothing to show for it. Like, I had the dating resume of like an 11-year-old. And sometimes, honestly, I almost wish I hadn't experienced any of it at all, because I feel like I know more about the bad than I know about the good. And I've tried so hard and haven't been able to find someone. And that almost makes me feel more unlovable than if I just hadn't tried at all and just never put my heart on the line, And the last thing I want to talk about is your right to be heartbroken over situationships. I'm not going to lie. Every time I see a TikTok that's like me being more heartbroken over my 6-month situationship than my 3-year relationship, I feel a little bit validated because I used to be so embarrassed of how torn up I was about a guy that I dated for like a few months, who also never wanted anything serious with me to begin with. But the truth is, or I wouldn't know, but this is what I've been told, with long-term relationships, if you break up, it's because things have run their course. But with situationships, it's a big what if. It's so easy to romanticize, especially if you only went through the honeymoon phase. A lot of times it's like a quote-unquote right person, wrong time situation. Not that I believe in that. And it's just very easy to lean into this star-crossed lovers what could have been narrative. But yeah, I remember, especially when I spoke to my friends who were having issues in their actual relationships, obviously not a comparison game, everyone's feelings are valid, but I felt the need to take up less space because my heartbreak was less valid. And I always had this deep-seated fear of being judged if I complained about it too much or got too sad about it. And that kind of leads me into my concluding, I don't know, not advice, takeaways. They're my takeaways for myself. They may apply to you, they may not. I honestly think at the end of the day, situationships don't really work for me, because if I like someone enough to spend that much time with them and be intimate with them, I either already want to date them or I'm going to want to date them later down the road. But at the very least, if it's someone that I can see myself with from the get-go, I obviously cannot pursue something more casual, because then you're just settling for less than what you actually want. And not only has that had a really negative impact on my self-esteem over the years, it also means you're probably not going to be happy with how things actually play out. Like, you're never going to be getting as much from this person as you truly want. My second piece of advice is to really hold situationships to the same standards that you hold other people in your life. Like, actively monitor whether this person is actually making you happier than before you met them. Obviously, they make you happy sometimes, or you wouldn't have gotten in the situation in the first place. But if your anxiety about their inconsistent behavior, or your spiraling about them being distant, or your sadness about the fact that they don't want more with you is outweighing those moments of joy that you have with them, it's not worth it. And the thing is, I'm fortunate in the sense that I genuinely am pretty happy alone, but even if you aren't happy alone, you have better luck working towards happiness on your own than in a situation where you're being treated in a way that's unfair to you. And the last thing I'll say is be intentional about who you talk to about your situationships. Obviously, I hope you all have amazing friends and you can talk to any of them about anything, but I'm not gonna lie, it does help to speak to someone who's been through something similar. Like, if someone came to me before I'd been through any situationships, I would be like, just end it. Like, you're not happy. It's not going anywhere anyway. What's the problem? It is helpful to speak to someone who either understands how you feel or is completely judgment-free and willing to validate how you feel. Because what you don't want to happen is that you start spiraling that your friends are judging you, or that you're complaining too much about a small thing, or that you're becoming a burden, because then you're letting the collateral damage of your situationship also affect your friendships, and that's really not good. Okay, I'm getting very emotionally drained from digging up all my old heartbreaks, so I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. I genuinely hope, more so than usual, that this was interesting or helpful to you, because otherwise I just exposed my embarrassing dating history for literally no reason. But as always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys!